In 544, Justinian's empire was on fire. None of his generals were able to fill the void left by Belisarius' absence. He had just received word from his generals in Italy that they were not able to continue the war against Totila and the resurgent Ostrogoths. Simultaneously, Totila was writing a letter of his own, but this letter was for the Senate in Rome, imploring them to turn away from Justinian and to pledge allegiance to him and his army. Totila's grip on the peninsula was tightening. Justinian was in danger of losing his prized conquest. There was only one man that he could turn to if he wanted it saved. Late in the evening, he went home, often turning around as he withdrew and looking in every direction for those who might be advancing to put him to death. Accompanied by this dread, he entered his home and sat down alone upon his couch. His spirit broken, he failed even to remember the time when he was a man. Sweating, dizzy, and trembling, he counted himself lost. Devoured by slavish fears and mortal worry, he was completely emasculated. Such was the state of the great Belisarius at this time. His life was rudderless, his rank was gone, his wealth had been stripped from him. His wife, Antonina, had been unfaithful to him, and Procopius writes that, on this particular day, she paced the halls of their home, feigning indigestion, rather than comforting her devastated husband, who felt that he had so little left to live for. As these events played out, a representative from the imperial palace arrived at the couple's home. Belisarius believed that this was the moment. An assassin had finally come to put him out of his misery. The great general, quote, drew up his arms and legs onto the couch and lay down on his back, ready for the end. So far had all manhood left him, unquote. But to everyone's surprise, this was not an assassin. It was a messenger, who was carrying a letter from Empress Theodora. The letter read, "You know, sir, your offense against us. But because I am greatly indebted to your wife, I have decided to dismiss all charges against you and to give her your life. So for the future, you may be of good cheer as to your personal safety and that of your property. But we shall know by what happens to you how you conduct yourself toward her." In response, Belisarius was overcome with joy. He fell to the ground and kissed Antonina's feet, pledging to be her faithful servant from that day forward. Now, on the surface, this might sound a little weird. Belisarius allegedly plotted against the imperial family, was stripped of his rank, and then one day Theodora just shows up and is like, "We're cool now, and everything is fine." But there's more going on here behind the scenes that bring the picture into focus. Firstly, we have the relationship between Belisarius and Antonina. These two had a rocky relationship at this point due to Antonina's alleged infidelities. Belisarius had essentially placed her under house arrest following his campaign against the Sasanians in 541, so that he could sort this situation out. Secondly, we have the relationship between Antonina and Theodora. The Empress had worked with Antonina many times to accomplish her goals. The two were often allies, and Theodora may have wanted to help her friend while also getting back at the husband who had shunned her over an alleged affair. Thirdly, we have the relationship between Belisarius and the imperial couple. Belisarius was certainly a candidate for the imperial throne. Everyone knew this. I've talked about this before, but a popular and successful general is always a threat to the emperor. That's not to say that Belisarius would ever turn on Justinian, but the threat was there. The alleged meeting with Buzes in 542 would have only exacerbated those concerns for Justinian and Theodora. And fourthly, we have the actual state of the empire in 543 and 544, which was less than great, particularly in Italy. So let's look at all of this in context so that we can see the full story of Belisarius' fall from favor, the disgrace he suffered for approximately 18 months, and his return to command. So Justinian and Theodora ran the empire. Belisarius and Antonina were a step right below them, but each of these two was held in very high favor by their counterpart in the imperial palace. Belisarius' successes threatened to potentially upend this order, though, making these two somewhat weary of these two. Additionally, the marriage between Belisarius and Antonina had fallen on hard times, and Theodora was much more loyal to Antonina than she was to Belisarius. When Justinian fell ill and nearly died in 542, Belisarius allegedly stated that he would not accept any successor to the throne unless he was consulted. Theodora was understandably upset by this, and when Justinian recovered, he likely would have felt the same way. This meant that there were fissures between these two, and these two, but still a relatively strong bond between these two. So these two punished Belisarius in order to make it clear that this was the order. The power comes from here, and any attempt to turn this around would be swiftly crushed. But at the same time, Justinian was practical, and he recognized Belisarius' skill. When Italy, his prized new conquest, fell into chaos, he would have wanted to turn to his best general in order to fix it. But he couldn't just take Belisarius back. That would defeat the whole purpose. Belisarius had threatened the order, and he was being punished for it. If Justinian went crawling back to Belisarius, that could undermine the entire message. It would show that Justinian needed Belisarius, and that's the opposite of what Justinian and Theodora wanted to show. But if, by chance, Justinian had the opportunity to seem merciful rather than desperate, he could get his general back without looking weak. And luckily for the imperial couple, this friendship and this fractured marriage presented that perfect opportunity. Theodora, and not Justinian, could forgive Belisarius. The emperor himself would be saved from having to beg for Belisarius to come back. Theodora could claim that she was doing this for Antonina, which may or may not have truth to it. But in claiming that, she was also not admitting that the empire needed Belisarius. She was instead saying that Belisarius needed Antonina to be back in the imperial couple's good graces. This would help to mend the fractured marriage and elevate Antonina in Belisarius' eyes. Theodora was making a gesture of goodwill to her friend, and perhaps giving Antonina a reason to continue working with her in the future. So these three people are all getting something out of this. Justinian got his general. Theodora looked gracious and was able to do a favor for a friend. Antonina was elevated within her own household. Everybody won, except for Belisarius, who was clearly knocked down a few pegs. But it wasn't just his pride that was hurt here. There were conditions to his reinstatement that made this even more humiliating for him. Prior to his disgrace, Belisarius had been the Magister Militum in the East. Magister Militum is a Latin phrase meaning master of soldiers, and the title was given to the supreme military commander in a region. But that position in the East was now held by Martinus. Instead, Belisarius was given the rank of Commissari Stabuli, which is the Count of the Sacred Stables, a title given to the man in charge of the horses and pack animals in the Imperial Army. Now, to be clear, this is a high-ranking position, but it is a step below the Magister Militum, so it's a demotion. Additionally, much of Belisarius' wealth was restored to him, but he was told that he was to purchase the resources needed for the campaign in Italy from his own pocket, and not to ask the emperor for further imperial funds. All of this together was meant to put Belisarius in his place. Now, there is one more thing that I want to point out about this saga, and that is the difference between the account that Procopius writes in History of the Wars and the account that he writes in the Secret History. In History of the Wars, Procopius says that Belisarius was recalled from the east in 542, quote, at the summons of the emperor in order to be sent again to Italy, since the situation there was already full of difficulties for the Romans, unquote. And that's it. No account of the meeting with Buzes, no mention of the disgrace, no talk of his reappointment. All of it, comes from the Secret History. And because the Secret History is sometimes dubious, I want to discuss why this account is actually preferable to the one outlined, or I guess ignored, in History of the Wars. To do this, we need to look at the whole timeline. In the summer of 542, Belisarius was in command in the east. At the end of 542, he was back in Constantinople. In the spring of 544, he was on his way back to Italy. That leaves about 18 months in between, where Belisarius was not in command anywhere. In this time, Totila won victories at Faventia and Mucelium, and had shored up support across Italy. It was around this time that Justinian sent Maximinus and Demetrius to Italy to clean up the situation. Check out my video on the Siege of Naples for more information. In the spring of 543, Naples fell to Totila and the Ostrogoths. Later that year, the generals in Italy wrote Justinian to tell him that they could not continue the war effort. And around the same time, Totila was preparing to move on Rome. And only after all of this does Belisarius regain command in the west. If Belisarius was being recalled to go to Italy, as History of the Wars says, he would have, gone to Italy. He would not have gone to Constantinople, waited for all this stuff to happen in Italy, and only then gone to Italy, but with a lesser title. So something must have happened here. Something that delayed him from going to the west, but resulted in him eventually arriving in Italy with a lower rank and less resources. So the account in the Secret History fits, and it fits really, really well. One could argue the extent to which Antonina and Theodora were involved. And the Secret History is very often anti-Antonina and anti-Theodora, so it's reasonable to question the extent to which Belisarius' return was a favor from the Empress to Antonina, or how much of it was Justinian's mercy and pragmatism. But either way, I think it's pretty clear that there was some fall from favor between his recall from the east and his eventual return to the west. And it's something that was just ignored in History of the Wars. But regardless of what exactly went down here, as of the spring of 544, all of it was in the past. Belisarius was on his way back to Italy to deal with the resurgent Ostrogoths, and he was about to refight a war that he had already won.